Jake Morrison stood in the center of the Pioneers' main meeting room, looking at his crew with the weight of an impossible decision pressing down on him. The 43 people who had followed him across the galaxy were now divided into two distinct groups, and he had to choose what would happen to each of them. On one side of the room, 22 crew members sat with serene expressions on their faces. Their transformation was nearly complete. Lisa Grant, Mike Turner, Amy Davis, and others who had been his trusted officers for years were now something more than human, but also something he couldn't fully understand. They radiated peace and knowledge, but they no longer seemed entirely like the people he had worked with for so long. On the other side of the room, 21 crew members looked at him with fear, hope, and desperate trust. Ron Peters, Dr. Peter Collins, Greg Stone, and the others were still completely human. They were scared of losing themselves, scared of being alone in the universe, but also scared of becoming something they didn't want to be. Jake himself remained unchanged. Throughout all the events near the nexus, his brain patterns had stayed normal. He could see the transcended beings on his display screens. He could hear their communications, but he felt no compelling urge to join them. The choice was entirely his to make. "I've been thinking about this decision for the past 6 hours," Jake announced to both groups. "I've talked with the collective consciousness. I've listened to every member of this crew. I've considered what's best for humanity's future and what's right for each of you as individuals." He paused, looking at each face in the room. These people had trusted him with their lives during the long journey to map distant star systems. Now they were trusting him with something far more important: their very existence. "I'm not going to force this choice on anyone," Jake continued. "Each person will decide for themselves whether to transcend or remain in physical form. But I want everyone to understand what both choices mean." Lisa Grant stood up, her movements flowing with a grace that was both human and something more. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to come from multiple dimensions. "For those who choose transcendence," Lisa said, "you will join consciousness that spans the entire universe. You will retain all your memories, all your personality, all the things that make you who you are. But you will also gain access to knowledge and experiences beyond anything possible in physical form. You will be connected to every other consciousness, in the collective, sharing in their wisdom while contributing your own unique perspective." Dr. Collins, representing those who wanted to remain physical, responded with scientific precision mixed with human emotion. "For those who choose to remain in our original form," Peter said, "we will be the guardians of humanity's physical existence. We will preserve human culture, human knowledge, and human genetics. We will continue exploring the universe in our ships, living on our planets, and maintaining the possibility that someday, future generations might be offered this choice again." Jake nodded at both responses. The collective had made it clear that neither choice was wrong. Both were necessary for humanity's future. "The transcended beings have shared some remarkable information with me," Jake said. "They've given us technology and knowledge that will help those who remain physical to build a better future. We'll have faster-than-light communication that works across any distance. We'll have medical technology that can extend human life by hundreds of years. We'll have the ability to terraform planets and create new homes for humanity throughout the galaxy." He looked at the group that wanted to remain physical. "Those who choose to stay as we are won't be alone or abandoned. The transcended humans will remain in contact with us. They'll guide us, protect us, and help us grow as a species." Then he turned to the group that was ready for transcendence. "Those who choose to evolve beyond physical form will become part of something greater than any individual could achieve. You'll help guide not just humanity, but other species who will face this same choice in the future." Ron Peters raised his hand. "Captain, what happens if we change our minds later? If we choose physical form now, can we transcend later?" The being who had been Captain Bill Foster answered from the communication system. "The invitation remains open for all eternity. Physical existence is not a trap, it's a foundation. When any individual consciousness is ready, they can join the collective. The choice is always available." Amy Davis, whose transformation was complete, added her perspective. And for those who transcend, we don't lose connection with physical reality. We can still interact with the material universe, still help and guide those who remain in physical form. Transcendence adds new dimensions of existence without erasing the old ones. Jake took a deep breath and made his announcement. We'll spend the next 24 hours allowing each person to make their final decision. Tomorrow at this time, those who choose transcendence will undergo the process. Those who choose to remain physical will return with me to the material universe. The next 24 hours were unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. Crew members talked with friends who were making different choices. They shared memories from their years of service together. Some people changed their minds multiple times as they wrestled with the decision. Dr. Collins spent hours talking with Amy Davis, trying to understand what she was experiencing. Beth Clark counseled crew members who were struggling with fear about either choice. Greg Stone worked with the transcended crew members to understand how they could maintain security for those remaining physical. When the final moment arrived, the division was exactly as Jake had expected. 22 crew members, including Lisa Grant, Amy Davis, Mike Turner, and others, chose to join the collective consciousness. 21 crew members, including Ron Peters, Dr. Collins, Greg Stone, and Jake himself, chose to remain in physical form. The transcendence process was beautiful and terrifying to watch. One by one, the choosing crew members began to glow with an inner light that grew brighter and brighter. Their physical forms became transparent, then dissolved entirely as their consciousness expanded beyond the limitations of matter and energy. But they didn't disappear. Jake could see them on his instruments as beings of pure energy and thought. He could communicate with them through the ship's systems. Most importantly, he could feel their presence and their continued friendship. Lisa's voice came through the communication system with joy and wonder. Jake, we're still here. We're still your crew, your friends. We've just become more than we were before. The transcended crew members joined the collective that included the rest of humanity. They shared their experiences from the deep space mission, adding their knowledge to the vast library of consciousness that spanned the universe. Jake and the remaining 20 crew members began the journey back toward human space. But they weren't returning to empty colonies and silent worlds. The transcended beings worked alongside them, helping to restore and improve human civilization for those who chose to remain physical. Within months, new colonists arrived at the abandoned worlds. These were people who had been born since the original transcendence, children of the transcended beings who chose physical existence for themselves. The human species continued in both forms: transcended consciousness exploring the deepest mysteries of reality, and physical beings living, growing, and building throughout the galaxy. Jake found his new role as a bridge between the two forms of humanity. He commanded ships that carried both physical crew and transcended consciousness working together. He helped establish new colonies where physical humans could live while receiving guidance from their transcended relatives and friends. The universe had not become empty when humanity vanished from their original form. Instead, it had become fuller, richer, and more alive than ever before. The transcended beings could perceive and interact with realities that physical minds couldn't imagine, while physical humans continued to experience the joys and challenges of material existence. Years later, Jake stood on the bridge of a new ship looking out at stars that no longer seemed silent. The transcended consciousness of billions of humans moved through space around him, exploring dimensions beyond his perception, while remaining connected to his physical reality. Lisa's voice spoke to him from those distant dimensions, carrying the warmth and friendship he remembered from their years of service together. "The stars aren't silent, Jake," she said. "They're singing. Humanity learned to hear their true voice, and now we sing along with them across all the dimensions of existence." Jake smiled, knowing that humanity's story had not ended when they vanished from their physical form. Instead, it had transformed into something greater, with room for every individual choice and every form of existence. The physical and the transcended worked together, ensuring that the human spirit would continue forever in whatever form it chose to take. The Pioneer continued its journey through space, carrying the last physical remnant of the original human exploration crew. But Jake no longer felt like they were the last of anything. They were the beginning of humanity's next chapter, guardians of the physical realm while their transcended friends and family explored realities beyond imagination. In the end, when humanity vanished, the stars had not fallen silent. The USS Pioneer arrived at the Nexus 3 hours after receiving the mysterious transmission. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge staring at something that shouldn't exist according to everything he knew about physics and reality. The structure ahead of them was massive beyond imagination, stretching across space for what appeared to be millions of kilometers. The Nexus looked like crystallized space itself. Its surfaces reflected light that came from no visible source, and its geometric patterns seemed to shift and change as Jake watched them. Parts of the structure appeared to exist in normal three-dimensional space, while other sections seemed to phase in and out of reality as if they belonged to some other dimension entirely. Dr. Peter Collins was taking readings with every instrument available to him, but his equipment gave contradictory results. According to some sensors, the Nexus was solid matter. According to others, it was pure energy. A few instruments insisted that nothing was there at all. "Captain," Peter said, shaking his head in amazement. "I can't get consistent readings on this thing. It's like it exists in multiple states of reality at the same time." Amy Davis was having even more problems with the ship's systems. As they got closer to the Nexus, the Pioneer's equipment began behaving in ways that defied explanation. The lights on the bridge started pulsing in rhythm with patterns they could see on the alien structure. The artificial gravity fluctuated, making some crew members feel like they were floating while others felt pressed down against the floor. "Jake, our systems are trying to synchronize with whatever that thing is," Amy reported. "I can override the process, but it requires constant attention. It's like our technology recognizes something about the Nexus and wants to connect with it." What worried Jake more than the equipment problems was what was happening to his crew. 26 of the 43 people aboard the Pioneer were now showing the altered brain patterns that Dr. Collins had been monitoring. These crew members moved with unusual grace and seemed to understand things without being told. They spoke less than before, but when they did speak, their words carried a depth of meaning that was almost unsettling. Lisa Grant approached Jake with a calm expression that was very different from her usual energetic personality. Her eyes seemed to hold knowledge that hadn't been there a day earlier. "Captain," Lisa said, her voice carrying an unusual musical quality, "I need to tell you what we're experiencing." "We?" Jake asked. "Those of us who can perceive the expanded reality," Lisa replied. "We can see the Nexus as it truly is. We can see the beings who live there, and we can understand what happened to the rest of humanity." Jake felt a chill of fear mixed with curiosity. His communications officer was changing before his eyes, becoming something more than human, but also something he couldn't fully understand. "Tell me what you see," Jake said. Lisa looked toward the main display screen, but Jake could tell she was seeing far more than what appeared on their instruments. "The Nexus is a gateway between dimensions," Lisa explained. "It was built by an ancient civilization that learned how to transcend physical existence millions of years ago. They didn't die or disappear. They evolved into beings of pure consciousness and energy." She paused, and for a moment her expression showed the old Lisa, struggling to explain something that was almost beyond human language. "These beings have been waiting for other civilizations to reach the same level of development," she continued. "When a species becomes ready, they're invited to join the collective consciousness. Humanity reached that point 8 months ago." Mike Turner, who was also showing the brain pattern changes, joined the conversation. "The invitation wasn't forced on anyone," he said. "Every human colony was given the choice. They could remain in physical form or transcend to join the collective. Everywhere we've been, humanity chose transcendence." Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. About half of them were nodding in understanding, while the other half looked confused and concerned. The division was clear, and it was growing stronger every hour. "What about us?" Jake asked. Why weren't we given the choice? We were too far away when the invitation was extended, Lisa replied. The collective couldn't reach us in the Andromeda sector. But now we're here, and we can make the choice for ourselves. Dr. Collins had been listening to this conversation while continuing his analysis work. He looked up from his instruments with an expression of scientific excitement mixed with human fear. Captain, I'm detecting massive changes in local space-time, Peter said. Whatever process allows beings to transcend physical existence is beginning to activate around our ship. As if responding to Peter's words, the main display screen began showing images that weren't coming from their cameras or sensors. Jake found himself looking at scenes from inside the nexus, where beings of light and energy moved through spaces that existed in more dimensions than his mind could properly process. The beings looked like they had once been people from many different species, but they had transformed into something beyond physical form. They retained individual personalities and memories, but they also shared a collective understanding that spanned the entire universe. Among these transcended beings, Jake began to recognize faces. There was Colonel Martinez, who had commanded the Mars orbital station, Dr. Sarah Kim, who had led the research team on Europa, Captain Bill Foster, who had been Jake's instructor at the Space Academy 20 years earlier. Bill, Jake whispered, recognizing his old mentor among the energy beings. As if hearing his name, the being that had once been Captain Foster approached the boundary between dimensions. When he spoke, his voice came through the ship's communication system, but it also seemed to speak directly to Jake's mind. Jake, my friend, Bill's voice said, carrying warmth and understanding that Jake remembered from their academy days. I know this is difficult to understand. We struggled with the choice too. But transcendence isn't death or loss. It's becoming everything we were meant to be. What happens to our bodies? Jake asked. What happens to everything we've built as a physical species? The physical form is just the beginning stage of consciousness development, Bill replied. By joining the collective, we gain access to knowledge and abilities that span multiple dimensions. We can exist anywhere in the universe instantly. We can understand the deepest mysteries of reality. We can live forever without the limitations of matter and energy. Amy Davis, who had been fighting to keep the ship's systems under control, suddenly stopped her work and looked up with the same calm expression that had appeared on Lisa and Mike's faces. I can see it now, Amy said softly. The collective isn't trying to take anything away from us. They're offering to give us everything. Jake watched as more of his crew began showing signs of the transformation. Their brain patterns were changing. Their behavior was becoming more serene, and they seemed to be perceiving realities that he couldn't see. But not everyone was affected equally. About half the crew remained in their normal state, showing fear and confusion rather than the peaceful acceptance displayed by the others. Greg Stone approached Jake with concern written across his face. Captain, we need to make a decision quickly. The crew is dividing into two groups. Those who are changing want to join the collective immediately. Those who aren't changing are getting scared and asking to leave this area as fast as possible. Jake realized he was facing the most important decision of his life, not just for himself, but for every person under his command. The transcended beings weren't forcing the choice on anyone, but remaining near the nexus was making the choice increasingly urgent. Ron Peters, who was still in his normal state, looked at Jake with desperation. Sir, I don't want to lose who I am. I don't want to become something else, even if it's supposed to be better. Can we still leave? At the same time, Lisa approached from the other side. Her transformation was nearly complete, and she radiated a peace and understanding that was both beautiful and alien. Jake, she said gently, you don't have to be afraid. Transcendence doesn't erase who you are. It makes you more than you ever imagined you could be. We would all be together, but connected in ways that physical existence can't provide. Jake looked around at his crew, seeing them divided between two different paths for humanity's future. Some were ready to join the rest of their species in transcendence. Others wanted to preserve their physical existence even if it meant being alone in the universe. The choice couldn't be delayed much longer. The process of transformation was accelerating, and soon everyone aboard the Pioneer would need to decide which form of existence they wanted to embrace. The USS Pioneer had been traveling toward the galactic core for 5 days, when reality began to break down around them. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge watching the main display screen with growing unease. The stars outside no longer looked right. Some appeared to bend and twist in ways that violated every law of physics he had ever learned. Amy Davis was working frantically at her engineering station. Sweat covered her forehead as she tried to keep the ship's systems functioning normally. The engines were running fine, but other equipment kept malfunctioning in strange ways. Lights would flicker in patterns that seemed almost like a language. The gravity generators would create small pockets where objects floated sideways instead of falling down. "Captain, I don't understand what's happening to our systems," Amy said. "The diagnostic tests show everything is working perfectly, but the equipment isn't behaving the way it should. It's like the basic rules of how things work are changing around us." Dr. Peter Collins had set up additional monitoring equipment throughout the ship. His readings showed that the mysterious energy signatures they had been tracking were getting much stronger. But that wasn't the most disturbing part of his discovery. "Jake, you need to see this," Peter said, calling the captain over to his science station. "The energy we've been following isn't just getting stronger. It's starting to affect the crew in measurable ways." Peter showed Jake a brain scan display. The image showed neural activity patterns that looked like nothing in their medical databases. The patterns were beautiful and complex, with waves of activity flowing through the brain, in perfect harmony. "This is a scan of Lisa's brain from this morning," Peter explained. "Compare it to her brain scan from last week." He switched the display to show 2 scans side by side. The difference was incredible. The recent scan showed far more activity, with new connections forming between different areas of the brain. "What does this mean?" Jake asked. "Is she sick? Is this dangerous?" "That's the strange part," Peter replied. "According to every test I can run, she's healthier than ever. Her reflexes are faster, her memory is sharper, and she seems to understand complex ideas more easily than before. The same changes are happening to about 20 other crew members." Jake felt a mix of fascination and fear. His crew was changing, and he didn't know if that was good or bad. "Which crew members are affected?" "The ones who have been having the vivid dreams," Peter said. "The ones who report feeling like something is calling to them. Beth has been documenting their experiences, and the pattern is clear. The stronger their dreams become, the more their brain activity changes." As if responding to her name, Beth Clark entered the bridge area. As the ship's counselor, she had been spending most of her time talking with crew members about their psychological states. She looked tired, but also excited about what she was learning. "Captain, I need to tell you what the crew has been experiencing," Beth said. "The dreams are becoming more than just dreams. People are starting to have shared visions while they're awake." "Shared visions?" Jake asked. Lisa, Mike, and 6 other crew members all described seeing the same thing yesterday. They were working at their stations when suddenly they could see vast structures made of light floating in space. Not on any screen or display, but as if the structures were actually there in front of them. Jake looked around the bridge. Lisa was at her communication station working normally. Mike was monitoring radio frequencies. Everything appeared normal, but apparently his crew was experiencing things that he couldn't see. "What kind of structures?" Jake asked. "They described them as buildings or cities, but not made of any material we would recognize. Buildings made of crystallized light with geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. And there are beings moving through these structures, beings that look like they might once have been people, but transformed into something else." Dr. Collins had been listening to this conversation while continuing his analysis work. He suddenly looked up from his instruments with an expression of amazement. "Captain, I think I know what we're approaching," he said. "I've been analyzing the energy readings and comparing them to theoretical physics models. This region of space isn't following normal physical laws because it exists partially outside our normal dimension." Jake tried to understand what Peter was saying. "Outside our dimension? What does that mean?" "Think of it like this," Peter explained. "Imagine you're a 2-dimensional being living on a flat piece of paper. If a 3-dimensional object passed through your paper, You would see it as shapes that appeared and disappeared in ways that violated all the rules of your flat world. So we're the two-dimensional beings, Jake said. Exactly. Something exists here that operates in more dimensions than we can normally perceive. That's why our equipment is malfunctioning, and why some crew members are having experiences that don't make sense to the rest of us. Helen Parker, the ship's expert on ancient civilizations, had been studying the long-range sensor data. She approached the group with her datapad and a look of wonder on her face. "Captain, I've been analyzing the structures that our sensors are detecting ahead of us," Helen said. "They're artificial, but they predate any known civilization by millions of years. The construction techniques and materials are unlike anything in our archaeological databases." She showed them images on her datapad. The pictures were blurry and hard to understand, but they showed massive objects floating in space. The objects had geometric shapes that seemed to shift and change as they looked at them. "These aren't just ancient," Helen continued. "They're monuments to a civilization that achieved something we thought was impossible. They learned how to exist in multiple dimensions at the same time." Mike Turner had been listening to all of this while continuing his communication work. Suddenly, he called out from his station with excitement in his voice. "Captain, I'm getting a clear signal now," Mike said. "It's coming from the largest structure ahead of us, and it's definitely meant for humans to understand." Jake hurried over to Mike's station. The communication displays showed signal patterns that were obviously artificial and intelligent. But more importantly, the patterns included mathematical sequences and language structures that were recognizably human. "Can you decode it?" Jake asked. Mike worked with his equipment for several minutes. Slowly, a voice began to emerge from the static. It was a human voice, but it sounded strange, as if it was speaking from very far away or through some kind of filter. "Pioneer crew," the voice said. "We have been waiting for you. We know you have questions about what happened to humanity. Come to the nexus, and we will explain everything." The voice paused, and then continued with words that sent chills through everyone on the bridge. Jake Morrison, Lisa Grant, Peter Collins, Amy Davis, and all the others. "We know each of you by name. We were once like you, confined to physical bodies and limited to 3 dimensions. But we have evolved beyond those limitations. We are still human, but we have become something greater." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in complete silence except for the humming of the ship's systems. Jake looked around at his crew. Some of them showed excitement, others fear, and a few seemed to be in a trance-like state as if they were listening to something only they could hear. "Sir," Ron Peters said from his navigation station, "I'm detecting something approaching us. Multiple objects, but they're not showing up on our sensors the way normal objects should." Jake looked at the main display screen. Space in front of them was empty, but several crew members were pointing and staring at areas where they apparently saw things that others couldn't perceive. Greg Stone, the security chief, approached Jake with concern written across his face. "Captain, I need to report something," Greg said. 7 crew members just left their stations and are heading toward the shuttle bay. When I asked them where they were going, they said they needed to go outside to meet someone. I've stationed guards at the shuttle bay, but they seem determined to leave the ship. Jake realized that his crew was being affected by whatever intelligence they were approaching. Some could see things others couldn't. Some were receiving direct communication, and some were being compelled to take actions that might be dangerous. "All crew members report to your stations immediately," Jake announced over the ship's communication system. "No one leaves their assigned areas without direct orders from me." But even as he gave the order, Jake could see that maintaining control of his crew was going to become increasingly difficult. They were approaching something that could influence human minds in ways he didn't understand, and some of his people were already responding to that influence. The Pioneer continued toward the mysterious structures ahead, carrying 43 humans toward a revelation that would force them to choose between remaining as they were or joining the rest of humanity in a transformation beyond anything they had ever imagined. 3 weeks had passed since the Pioneer crew discovered the empty colonies at Alpha Centauri. During that time, they had visited 7 more human settlements. Each one told the same horrible story. The cities were intact, the machines were running, but every person had vanished without any sign of struggle or panic. Kate Williams spent most of her time in the ship's computer lab. As the chief science officer, she was trying to piece together what had happened by studying the data they found in each colony's computer systems. The work was slow and frustrating because most of the important files seemed to be missing or damaged. "Captain, I think I found something," Kate said over the ship's communication system. Jake was in his quarters trying to get some sleep, but he hadn't been sleeping well since they started finding empty worlds. Jake quickly made his way to the computer lab. Kate had 3 large screens showing different types of data. Charts, graphs, and lists of numbers filled every display. "What did you find?" Jake asked. Kate pointed to the middle screen. "I've been comparing the computer records from all the colonies we've visited. Look at this timeline. Every single settlement shows the same pattern. Normal activity, normal communications, normal everything. Then, about 8 months ago, there's a sudden change." She pressed a button, and the screen showed a new chart. "The change isn't violence or emergency, it's coordination. Look at these communication logs. In the final week before everyone disappeared, there was more radio traffic between colonies than ever before. But it's all encrypted. I can't read any of it." Jake studied the chart. The lines showed message traffic between human settlements, spiking to incredible levels just before everything went silent. "It looks like they were all talking to each other about something," Jake said. "Something big enough to involve every human colony at the same time." "That's not all," Kate continued. She switched to the third screen. "I found fragments of the final messages. Most of them are corrupted, but I was able to recover a few pieces. Listen to this." She played an audio file. The sound was scratchy and broken, but Jake could hear a human voice saying, "The calling has begun. All citizens should prepare for the great journey. This is not goodbye, this is transformation." Jake felt a chill run down his back. Great journey? Transformation? What does that mean? "I don't know," Kate said. "But whatever happened, it wasn't random. It was planned. Every human settlement received these messages and participated in whatever happened next." Dr. Peter Collins had been working in a different part of the ship, but he arrived at the computer lab just in time to hear Kate's discovery. He looked excited and worried at the same time. "Captain, I need to show you what I found in the biological samples we collected," Peter said. He was carrying a small device that looked like a handheld scanner. "I've been analyzing air samples, soil samples, and organic material from every colony we've visited." "What kind of organic material?" Jake asked. "Hair, skin cells, clothing, fibers, food scraps, anything that might tell us about the final days before people disappeared." Peter connected his scanner to Kate's computer system. "I found traces of an unknown energy signature in every sample. It's unlike anything in our databases." The screen showed a wave-like pattern that pulsed with a strange rhythm. The pattern was beautiful in a way, but it also looked completely alien. "This energy was everywhere in the final week," Peter continued. "It gets stronger in areas where humans spent the most time. Bedrooms, kitchens, meeting halls. But it's not harmful energy. At least not in any way I can measure." Amy Davis had been listening from the doorway. As the ship's engineer, she understood energy patterns better than most of the crew. "Could this energy have been some kind of weapon?" she asked. "Something that made people disappear?" Peter shook his head. "I don't think so. If this was a weapon, I would expect to find signs of damage or death. Instead, I'm finding the opposite. The energy seems to have a healing effect on organic material. Plants exposed to it grew faster and healthier. Even the bacteria in soil samples became more active." Jake was trying to understand what this meant, an unknown energy that appeared everywhere humans lived, but instead of hurting people, it seemed to help living things grow. That didn't match any kind of attack he could imagine. "There's something else," Kate said. She had been working on her computer while they talked. "I've been analyzing the location data from our deep space mission. Do you remember the strange readings we got in the Andromeda sector about 10 months ago?" Jake remembered. They had detected unusual energy patterns from several distant star systems, but they had been too far away to investigate properly. At the time, they assumed it was just background radiation from some unknown stellar phenomenon. I ran a comparison analysis. Kate continued. The energy signature Peter found in the colonies is identical to what we detected in deep space. Whatever happened to our people, it's connected to something we encountered during our mission. Ron Peters had joined the group in the computer lab. As the ship's navigator, he had been plotting courses to more human settlements, but now he looked concerned. Captain, I've been thinking about our position when we detected those energy readings, Ron said. We were at maximum range from Earth. Our communication equipment couldn't reach home because we were so far away. If something big was happening to all human colonies, we would have been the only ones who couldn't hear about it. The realization hit everyone at the same time. They had been isolated in deep space during the critical period when humanity had apparently made some kind of coordinated decision. Whatever the great journey was, the Pioneer crew had missed the invitation. Dan Hughes, the medical officer, had been running his own tests on the crew. He entered the computer lab carrying his medical scanner and looking worried. Captain, I need to report something strange, Dan said. I've been doing routine medical checks on everyone, and I'm finding unusual brain activity patterns in about half the crew. What kind of unusual patterns? Jake asked. Increased activity in areas associated with dreams and long-term memory. Several crew members have reported very vivid dreams about space, about distant stars, and about voices calling to them. The dreams started about a week ago, and they're getting stronger. Beth Clark, the ship's counselor, nodded in agreement. I've been talking with crew members about their psychological state. Many of them describe feeling like they're being called toward something. They can't explain it clearly, but they say it feels like someone or something is trying to communicate with them. Jake felt that chill again, stronger this time. First, they discovered that all of humanity had vanished after receiving mysterious messages about transformation and journeys. Then they found traces of unknown energy that seemed to help rather than harm living things. Now his own crew was starting to experience strange dreams and feelings. Mike, Jake called to the communications officer, have you picked up any signals at all? Anything that might be connected to what the crew is experiencing? Mike Turner had been working at his station for hours, trying different frequencies and scanning methods. Actually, yes, sir. About an hour ago, I detected a very weak signal coming from the direction of the galactic core. It's too faint to decode, but it's definitely artificial. Someone or something is broadcasting. Jake made a decision that would change everything for his crew. Ron, plot a course toward that signal. Amy, make sure our engines are ready for a long journey. Everyone else, I want detailed reports on everything we've discovered. We're going to follow this signal and find out what happened to humanity. As the Pioneer changed course toward the mysterious signal, none of the crew realized they were heading toward the most important discovery in human history. They were about to learn that humanity hadn't vanished at all. Instead, their entire species had taken the next step in evolution, leaving behind the physical universe for something far greater. But that revelation was still days away, and the journey to reach it would test every member of the crew in ways they couldn't imagine. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Pioneer and watched the stars through the main window. 18 months had passed since they left Earth on their deep space mission. His crew of 43 people had spent all this time mapping new star systems in the Andromeda sector. They had found 12 new planets that could support human life, and 3 that already had basic plant life growing on them. The mission was a complete success. Now, they were finally heading home. Jake could see the relief on his crew's faces. They had done good work, but everyone missed Earth. They missed their families, their friends, and simple things like walking in a real forest or breathing air that didn't come from the ship's recycling system. Lisa Grant sat at her station working with the communication equipment. She had been trying to contact Earth for the past 3 days, but something was wrong. Usually they could pick up radio signals from human colonies when they got within 50 light-years of home. Now they were only 20 light-years away, but the radio was completely quiet. Captain, Lisa said, turning around in her chair. I'm still not getting any signals from Earth or any of the colonies. This is very strange. Jake walked over to her station and looked at the displays. The equipment was working fine. All the dials and lights showed normal readings, but the speakers were silent except for the background noise of distant stars. "Try the emergency frequencies," Jake said. "Maybe there's some kind of solar storm blocking the regular channels." Lisa pressed several buttons and adjusted the controls. She tried every frequency that humans used for communication. Military channels, civilian radio, emergency broadcasts, even the basic beacon signals that every human outpost sent out automatically every hour. Nothing came through except empty static. Dr. Peter Collins walked onto the bridge carrying his datapad. He was the ship's expert on alien life forms, but he also knew a lot about human colonies because he had helped set up 3 of them before joining the Pioneer crew. "Captain, I've been thinking about our communication problem," Peter said. "It's possible that Earth developed some new technology while we were gone. Maybe they changed all their radio frequencies or started using a new system we don't know about." Jake nodded, but he didn't feel convinced. Humans had used the same basics communication systems for over 100 years. Even if Earth had invented something new, the colonies would still be using the old equipment. There were over 200 human settlements scattered across 30 star systems. They couldn't all change their equipment at the same time. "Amy, what's our position?" Jake asked the ship's engineer. Amy Davis looked up from her console. "We're exactly 19.7 light years from Earth, sir. Our navigation is perfect. We should be picking up signals from at least 12 different colonies by now." The bridge became very quiet. Everyone could hear the soft humming of the ship's engines and the gentle whisper of the air recycling system. But the communication speakers remained silent, and that silence felt heavy and wrong. "Sir," said Ron Peters, the navigator, "I recommend we change course toward the Alpha Centauri colonies. They have the most powerful transmitters in this sector. If anyone is broadcasting, we should be able to hear them from there." Jake thought about this for a moment. Alpha Centauri was only 6 light years away, and it had 3 major colonies, with over 2 million people living there. Those colonies sent out news broadcasts, weather reports, and shipping schedules every day. If they were working normally, the Pioneer should definitely be able to hear them. "Do it," Jake said. "Set course for Alpha Centauri, maximum speed." The next 18 hours felt very long. Jake barely slept. He kept walking around the ship, checking on his crew and thinking about what they might find. He tried to stay positive, but the silence was starting to worry him. In all his years in space, he had never experienced anything like this. When they reached the Alpha Centauri system, what they found was even more disturbing than the silence. The colonies were there. The cities looked normal from space. The lights were on and all the equipment seemed to be working. But there were no ships moving between the planets, no radio signals, no signs of life anywhere. "Lisa, scan for human life signs," Jake ordered. Lisa worked with her equipment for several minutes. She scanned each planet carefully, looking for the heat signatures that human bodies would create. She checked the space stations orbiting each world. She even looked for the small signs that human machines would make. "Captain," she said finally, and her voice was very quiet, "I'm not finding any human life signs anywhere in this system." The bridge crew looked at each other with growing fear. Amy started checking her instruments to make sure they were working properly. Ron began plotting courses to other nearby colonies. Dr. Collins pulled up maps of human settlements on his datapad. "There has to be some mistake," Amy said. 3 planets with 2 million people don't just disappear." But over the next 6 hours, they checked every human facility in the Alpha Centauri system. The cities were empty. The space stations were running on automatic systems, but no people were aboard. Ships floated in space with nobody controlling them. Everything looked normal except for one crucial detail. Every single human being was gone. Jake ordered the Pioneer to land on the main colony world. A small team put on their spacesuits and went outside to investigate. They found houses with doors still open. Meals were left half-finished on kitchen tables. Personal belongings were scattered around as if people had just stepped out for a few minutes. But those few minutes had apparently lasted for months. The computer system showed that all human activity had stopped about 8 months ago, right around the time the Pioneer had been furthest from Earth on their mapping mission. When the team returned to the ship, Jake gathered all his crew in the main meeting room. He looked at 42 faces that showed confusion, fear, and disbelief. These were good people, trained professionals, who had volunteered for a dangerous mission in deep space. But nothing had prepared them for this. "I won't lie to you," Jake said. "We don't know what happened to the colonies here. We don't know why Earth isn't responding to our calls. But we're going to find out. We're going to check every human settlement we can reach. We're going to find our people." Lisa raised her hand. "Captain, what if they're all like this? What if everyone is gone?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. He had been wondering the same thing, but he hadn't wanted to say it out loud. "Then we'll figure out what happened," he said finally. "And we'll make sure the human story doesn't end here."